So, remember this? Thought I'd do a little bit of a follow-up. And fortunately, it's good news. So just in case you missed it, on March 8th, this article was posted to Sci-Fi Wire, which took a quote from Vera Farmiga about her role in Godzilla King of the Monsters 2019 and how she saw it as a woman, and not only kind of misquoted it, but also blew it way out of proportion, clearly with the intention of trying to cause controversy, push an agenda, basically try to drive that dividing wedge into the Godzilla fandom, which has also found its way into so many other fandoms as the culture wars have continued. And here's the interesting thing. It doesn't seem to have worked. It got some responses, including the video I made, and while there were a few people who were responding in kind, the majority of responses was to simply point out the inaccuracy of the statement that King of the Monsters is the first Godzilla movie to pass the Bechdel test, and just leave it at that. I in particular said that I don't think this article should be given more attention than it deserves, and it doesn't really deserve much at all. So it should be largely ignored, and if it's going to be responded to, it should be responded to as calmly as possible. And fortunately, that's what most people seem to have done, whether it was in response to my video or not. And that's quite encouraging to see. There were a few people who took the bait set up by this article. It's human nature. But for the most part, it seems to have blown over. In fact, my video prompted a different video response from YouTuber Donnie Winter, stating that there is potentially a discussion to be had regarding this sort of thing, like representation of people in Godzilla movies and whatnot. But the thing is, it should be a discussion, not an argument, not preaching, or whatever term you choose to call it. It should actually be a civilized back and forth. I'll link to this video so you can see and hear for yourself what he has to say. Anyway, the point is, so far, this sort of divisive politicizing doesn't seem to have taken hold in the kaiju fandom. And it's not necessarily for lack of trying, because people have tried stirring up this sort of controversy before, and yet they haven't succeeded. Look back in 2018, last year. We had 4 giant monster movies released that year. Pacific Rim Uprising, Rampage, Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, and The Meg, in that order. Now, Pacific Rim Uprising is not a political film, not even in the slightest. It doesn't have much substance to it at all, if you ask me. But that didn't stop certain people from trying to apply politics to it. Check out this article from Newsweek. Headline: Pacific Rim Uprising trailer is Trump's globalism nightmare, because it depicts a world in which people of all nationalities from all over the world have united against a common threat, and somehow that means Trump is Hitler. Sure, I guess that makes sense in some parallel reality. Of course, as the headline stated, that article was written about the trailer, not about the movie itself. When people actually saw the movie, they realized it wasn't trying to be political. It was really just trying to be a Transformers movie. And when it actually got released and didn't do so well, the agenda pushers unhitched their wagons from that train as quickly as they could. So, it didn't take in that regard. Rampage, admittedly, did take things a little bit further by having its human villains be Trump allegories. Not necessarily in an overt way, though. Evil businessmen are a cliché going back decades, and you could technically look at Rampage and not necessarily see any evidence of President Trump in there. Still, it did try, but it ultimately wasn't held as that big of an issue. Most people didn't even discuss it. Then again, Rampage wasn't really a runaway success. It did all right, but it was far from a blockbuster. So, I'm not really surprised that people with agendas didn't necessarily latch onto it. After all, if you're going to use something as a platform, you want it to be as big and noticeable as possible. Rampage was only moderately noticeable. Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom went a little bit further than Rampage with having a Trump allegory villain, although he didn't show up until the very end. And, yet again, he wound up being the least talked about aspect of this movie. I mean, Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom wound up being a bit divisive in terms of how people received it, but ultimately it had nothing to do with politics. The divisiveness came from how it functioned as a movie, not how it functioned as a front on the culture wars. And I find that interesting, especially considering the first Jurassic World was saddled with its own bit of culture war controversy regarding sexism, but somehow Fallen Kingdom managed to avoid it as well, and it was a bit more successful than Rampage. Then along came the Meg, and the only thing of cultural significance it had to say was, "Please China, give us all your money." And apparently that happened. The Meg was the one hit nobody saw coming. It was a runaway success, doing far better than predicted. I don't necessarily know if there's a causality between the lack of politicizing and its success, but there is certainly a correlation there, so who knows if there's a connection or not. Either way, it didn't actually have any politics in it, and as far as I've seen, nobody's attempted to try latching onto it and making it political. Then again, how could you? And that, of course, brought us to this most recent scenario. Like I said, I find it very encouraging that we were able to somehow avoid that. And I don't necessarily know why it was avoided. It's possible that a large part of it had to do with how Captain Marvel was the big talking point for the month of March, which means all eyes were on that rather than on Godzilla, so maybe that was a part of it. It's also possible another factor might be that we as Godzilla fans are a bit more used to there being political undercurrents in our movies, and therefore we have a bit more experience discussing that aspect intelligently than other fandoms do. Then again, that doesn't explain what's going on with Star Trek. Anyway, the point is, crisis averted. For now. The thing is, we can't let our guard down. Just because we dodged this bullet doesn't mean the shooter is out of ammo. The Godzilla fandom is currently in an interesting position in the culture wars because we're one of those few remaining fronts where the culture wars haven't taken hold yet. And I think that means we have to be just as vigilant as ever to make sure things stay that way. Always remember, the culture wars, as they currently are, really come down to being a war of attrition. The thing is, regardless of what you look at, whether it's Gamergate or Disney Star Wars or Ghostbusters reboots or whatever, the way these things play out is always the same. It starts off as a topic specifically connected to something in pop culture. Then it evolves into a societal issue conveyed through that pop culture item. Then it becomes more focused on the societal issue. The societal issue suddenly becomes a different societal issue, and maybe becomes a different societal issue after that. And after a while, the ultimate goal is just to win. Whatever it started out as is immaterial. The two sides are only fighting because they want to win. They want to say they beat the other side. And experience tells us that it's not going to happen. I've said it before and I'll say it again. The madness helps no one. In this particular battle, the only way to win is to not engage in the first place, because that's exactly what the people who are starting it want us to do. So that means we have to remember how this played out, and we need to keep that in our minds should something like this come up again. I mean, it may not necessarily be portrayal of women in Godzilla movies. It could be someone trying to say that in King of the Monsters, Rodan starts out in Central America and then goes to the capital of the United States, which is somehow about immigration in Trump's America, or something like that. It'll probably be 100% bull, mind you, but someone may still come along and try to stir up controversy again. We need to remember that the best way to respond is to just be intelligent about it, to be calm and concise, and ultimately to not give it too much attention in the first place. Sometimes the person who stirs up controversy may not even believe what they're talking about. They're just looking to stir up controversy because it gets them attention. So we need to keep that in mind going forward. We cannot just take it for granted that we're going to remain Switzerland in this culture war for all intents and purposes. We have to be certain that things stay that way. May not be easy. It may be very tempting to just lash out at the next person who comes along and says something like this. But few things worth having are ever easy to get. And if remaining united as a fandom, at least as far as this subject matter goes, means we have to restrain ourselves, I would say that's worth it, whether it's easy or not. So far, the Giant Monster fandom has a good track record with this kind of thing. I'm just here to encourage everyone to stay on their toes and keep it that way. If any video I've ever made needs to be spread around, it is this video at this point. So, please, make sure as many people see it as possible so that we don't become the next Star Wars fandom. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like it, as well as subscribe to the channel for more content of a similar nature. Also, check the description for links to our Twitter, DeviantArt, and Patreon pages, as well as the Amazon link for the novel Operation Red Dragon: The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, penned by yours truly. Thank you all, and we appreciate your support.